To begin closing, while we've heard from many voices in the room and online, both on our panels and the audience from the webcast, we have one more thing to share with our audience to provide the voice of the CMT patient. So one thing that the Hereditary Neuropathy Foundation did was use True Reply voice activation technology along with, in partnership with Inspire, and asked the CMT community 2 questions. The first was, what is the one symptom of your CMT that has the biggest impact on your life, and how does this symptom affect your daily life? And so hundreds of patients responded, and we want to share with you their voices.
I can't sleep or work or drive. There's no comfortable position for me that doesn't feel like I'm on fire. Honestly, it's like being tortured. And to add to the misery, I'm treated like a drug addict.
Muscle atrophy.
Weakness and fatigue.
My inability to walk and stand up properly for long periods of time.
Balance.
Numbness.
My feet.
Not being able to use my hands.
Pain. Foot deformities. Numb and sore feet.
Stumbling.
I can't walk without braces.
Sensory deprivation.
Muscle loss.
Falling, not knowing when I'm going to fall.
The one symptom is the fact that I am losing the use of my hands. I've lost so much of the use of my feet, but I find that the loss of the use of my hands is the most devastating.
Foot drop. The biggest symptom of CMT has had on my life has been basically the loss of my independence.
It's my daughter's life, and it takes a toll on her life.
Foot pain is a horrible thing to deal with, and just the fact that, CMT has robbed me of so many opportunities to enjoy life, it's very depressing. When your feet hurt, you don't really want to do anything except stay home and hide. And, that's just one of the things that I regret about having this disease, missing out.
It makes it hard to do things around the house and to take care of my kids when I feel so exhausted that I just want to lay down all the time, period.
It is becoming harder and harder to look after my personal hygiene, to make meals for myself.
I'm weak. It affects my balance. I look weird. I have to wear braces to accommodate my muscle loss. And I know that it will only get worse.
It's disabling. I'm unable to perform household chores. It's very difficult to even get showers and take care of myself. Some days I'm so tired I cannot even get up out of my chair or bed.
It makes everything difficult for daily tasks like getting dressed, cooking, reaching, grabbing things, doing laundry, folding, even petting my dog or like holding my husband's hand.
With regards to my loss of independence, I basically have to rely on my caregiver, which is my loving wife, to assist me with the typical daily needs and activities, whether it's going out of the house, whether it's getting dressed, whether it's dinners or feeding. It's quite, if you will, depressing not to do the things that you could at one time, and now you find yourself in a situation where you can no longer accomplish the simplest of things.
So I think that really took us full circle today from where we started. First, hearing from kids and young adults with CMT and inherited neuropathies through the progression into adulthood, and of course the approaches to treatment that we talked about. We're now going to move into the summary of today's meeting, but before we do that, since this is really the last that you'll hear from me as your moderator, I just want to say that you all were described as being a community with big hearts, and I know that all of you are happy, courageous, persevering, positive people. So to be open and allow me to ask you difficult questions throughout the day, to really bring out some of the not so nice sides of living with your diseases, especially just being an outsider to this community. I want to thank each and every one of you for sharing your voices and letting me be a part of this very special day. So thank you. So now I have the distinct privilege of inviting up our summary remarks from the Food and Drug Administration. Our speaker is Dr. Lucas Kempf, who is the Associate Director for the Rare Diseases Program within the New Drug Review function in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. I think it's worth noting that prior to his joining FDA in 2012, Dr. Kempf spent 8 years at NIH, where he focused on neuroscience research, working to understand the genetics of neuropsychiatric diseases and developing translational approaches and therapeutics to study these disorders. He's involved in rare disease drug development and regulatory issues across all of the New Drug Review program. So a very important person to have been here all day today, and I'd like to welcome him to the stage to provide some remarks.
Thank you again for inviting us. There's several of us here at the audience, and I've been to several of these meetings in the past, and this is a very well-run and eloquent meeting that you just had. Just a little bit about me, since you all shared an extensive amount about yourselves. I first got involved in psychiatric genetics about 20 years ago. And what became obvious to me in the mid-90s was that while I was working in schizophrenia genetics, which is a heterogeneous grouping of neuropsychiatric illnesses that have probably just as many genetic causes as you all have discovered within your own community, there wasn't a community in the 90s like you have. So I actually helped start the schizophrenia.com in order to create an environment very much like what you've generated for yourselves, where people could get together and actually provide the support that you actually, most importantly, need from your peers. A lot of what we heard today was the advice that comes from actually living with the illness, understanding the illness, and being able to convey that to other folks who are going through the same process you went to. So of course, we had a really good day. Like they said at the beginning, fatigue is part of this illness, and that people would be kind of waking up through this. So at the beginning, I noticed there was about maybe 100 people participating, and by the end, we had over 300, which is great. And there's like 2.6 million people worldwide, so the impact of these 300 people will have a huge effect across, the entire world. As a gentleman at my table was telling me, coming from the Philippines, anything that happens here in the United States, any drugs that are developed, that's their only hope, is like it gets developed here, and then perhaps they can piggyback onto that. And that's going to be a worldwide effect that you all have when you have these sort of meetings. What I was impressed with from the beginning is that this is a very organized community, and I'd like to recognize the fact that your board has been so forward-thinking about how they've been approaching positioning you all for drug development and therapeutic development in general. It sounds like you've been very diligent about developing a very good understanding of the natural history of the illness, characterizing the variability within that, and then doing all the hard basic science research of characterizing the genetics that help understand all that variability, so that when it comes time for a therapeutic to come into your community, it's going to be very targeted and very easy to do. One of the things people don't appreciate about natural history, understanding the natural history of the disorder, is doing those natural history studies provides all the information about what you need to measure, how often you can measure it, what is tolerated by your community. Like when you have primary mobility issues, you cannot be asking people to come into the clinic every week. It's just not going to work, especially when everyone lives very far away from these centers of excellence. You had a whole section talking about how can you do this stuff at home, what would be applicable to your community for a drug company to be able to measure something that affects your lives, but it has to be done in your home, because obviously this is a full-time job taking care of these, taking care of your illness, and you don't want to be a full-time patient and drug study participant also. The other thing that I was very impressed with is not only how forward-thinking your scientists are, but like they're thinking about it in a way that is sort of innovative, of how you characterize not only the genetics of it, but also the resilience. And we heard a lot of the stories of resilience, but it's that whole resilience within your community is being reflected in your scientific approaches too, where you're looking at gene variants that are natural biological ways that you're modifying your illness to minimize the symptoms, which is going to jumpstart any sort of drug therapy approaches that some people may be able to go in, because obviously you all don't have exactly the same illness. Some people have very early onsets and some people have later onsets. So there's something that's causing that. And you're already thinking ahead to the point where that you're capitalizing on that variation, where some communities really haven't even gotten to that point where they understand that that's an important thing to address. So I took some notes about other important things that we heard today. Obviously, one of the more important things we heard is that obviously this starts as a childhood illness, and you had a very eloquent group of children who expressed how this is manifesting. And obviously every disorder that has chronic pain and stress causes anxiety and depression, and they were very eloquent about how that's affecting their lives, that is as equal to, in how they rated their disability, the social aspects, to the actual physical aspects that they were having problems with, which is quite profound. And what sort of touched me personally was the adult community coming together and saying, when you get through this, you're going to create a community around yourself that is supportive and not bullying, and you will get control of your life. Whereas, the major issues in your teenage years is you lost control and making that transition. And you very eloquently sent that message to your own childhood community, and all of which who are also serving as role models for those new kids who are getting diagnosed over time. The thing that struck me with your diagnosis is also that, Charcot, I'm a sort of a medical historian on the side, and Charcot obviously is one of those people you study about. That was like 150 years ago, and your disorder is named after him. And the typical thing for the 7,000 rare disorders that are recognized in the world is the diagnostic odyssey normally takes about 8 years for somebody to actually get a diagnosis. So we have a disorder that's named after one of the most famous neurologists 150 years ago, and still 50% of your population said that over 5 years it took you to get your diagnosis. Of course, on the opposite side, about 50% of you are getting diagnosed within the first year, which is somewhat encouraging that we're going in the right direction. And based on the revolution of genetics, hopefully that just accelerates so that we don't have this problem anymore, where people are going around and being told it's in their head, or they're just clumsy, or whatever it is that's preventing them to get ahead. The other aspects that we heard about today were that I find is important with these meetings, because sometimes people ask, like, why are we doing patient-focused drug development meetings? We can just read a paper, it tells us what's wrong with these people, and we'll just make a scale, and they'll do a study and we'll check the boxes and it goes ahead. But in rare disorders, not everybody has the same symptoms, and we kind of probed a lot of that today and trying to figure out what is affecting some people at certain stages, how severe is it, what are the rare things that we should also be looking at that might actually be more common. A lot of the respiratory issues got brought up with that, the hearing issues got brought up with that, and I don't think that was necessarily commonly recognized, and it definitely there was a big emphasis that the therapeutic instructions for patients with those issues is not addressed. And obviously that needs to be tracked in clinical trials. Also, when you have small numbers, you can't ask everyone just to be walking. Like, one of the questions was, if you're in a clinical trial, like, was mobility, a measurement of mobility, an issue? And I think it was about a third of the people said, yeah, that would be an issue. But it wasn't necessarily clarified, is that an issue because you're wheelchair bound and that you would not be able, even though if you wanted to participate, that is not a measure that would make sense for you. And then if that's a real issue, then you've lost all these people who could potentially be part of a clinical trial if the drug company is saying, oh, the only thing that matters is measuring how far you can walk in 5 minutes. So it's those sort of things that will come out of your analysis of the survey work that you did today that will really make a difference for helping drug developers or device developers or biologics, gene therapy developers understand what they should be measuring and how to address this population, meet you where you are for what you want in the future. So at least from the FDA, I appreciate this meeting. I think it was very successful. You should all be very proud of the work you did today.
Thank you, Dr. Kempf. And to provide our closing remarks, we have Robert Moore. You may know him as Allison's husband, but he has also been an advisor to the Hereditary Neuropathy Foundation since its inception, and even helped launch the patient registry that you all have. And he's also one of the founders of the voice technology company True Reply that we saw the results of today. So please join me in welcoming Robert Moore.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am indeed Robert Moore, Allison's husband. 24 years this week on Monday. 23 of those years spent with CMT in the family. And I really like the way that Estella described it. It's like this really nasty beast that lives with you, trying to trip you up every day. But we've gotten through it, and we're here now, and this has been just one of the most amazing events that I've ever had the privilege of participating in. So when Allison asked me to provide the closing remarks, I, of course, said yes. It would be an honor to do so. She said, it's going to be about 5 minutes. I was like, 5 minutes, piece of cake, do that standing on my head. And then I looked at the program, and it said 15 minutes. I'm like, oh, boy. I was woefully unprepared, so I'm going to have to speak very slowly to fill up my 15 minutes. Now, I don't think I'll have a problem filling up that 15, because we learned so much today, and there's so much to talk about that I'm very excited to share my feedback and finding with you. The next thing I want to do before I get into the bulk of my speech is make a promise that I'm going to try not to cry today. I did it a couple of years ago at the first summit, overwhelmed by emotion, and it was hard not to cry when you heard some of the testimony from the patients today. But I think after yesterday's SCOTUS hearing with the Senate and seeing what happened there, seeing a white 50-year-old, middle-aged man blubbering in a public venue is really not a good look. So I don't want to Kavanaugh today, so we're going to try hard not to do that. I mean, for Pete's sake, the guy's crying over his high school calendar. My father had a calendar. So anyway, moving on for that. I'd like to start with some well-deserved thank yous for the people that helped put on this event and were a part of it, starting with the FDA, Meghna and Lucas and your team. This has been an unbelievable collaboration with our organization, the Hereditary Neuropathy Foundation. You've been generous in your support and helping create what I think has been a really remarkable event. So I thank you for that. Speaking quickly, because we have a lot of these people to cover, is the sponsors. This event would not have happened without their financial support, continued financial support. So they are Pharnex, Accelerin, Cydan, Flex Pharma, Athena Diagnostics, Ionis, Ceres, Southern Vermont Wellness, Champlain Valley Dispensary, Cresco Labs, EverLife Foundation, and last but not least, the CMTA and the MDA. Thank you so much for your support. We could not have done this without you. Next, I'd like to really thank somebody who I just met yesterday and have the privilege to watch in action today is James Valentine. He's done an amazing job in shepherding this event, working with the team tirelessly up to the event. And I don't know about any of you guys, but I'd like to have James in my life like every day, just like, hey, Rob, you've looked at your Instagram feed enough. Don't you think it's time to move on? Do something productive? So, James, thank you very much. Most importantly, I want to thank the patients and caregivers that have not only attended here at great cost and personal sacrifice, also the ones participating at home through the live stream, the ones that participated through the True Reply survey, which is approaching 300 participants. So combined, we've had hundreds of people engaged in this event today, and I really applaud you, the patients, because I know it's difficult to get here. It's expensive. It's so much harder for you than it is for somebody like me to travel. So please give yourselves a well-deserved round of applause. So to recap some of the things that we've heard today, starts with CMT is a family disease. It spans generations, multiple generations in one family, alive with the disease at one time. And it's a really complicated disease because it prevents widely diverse symptoms and manifestations, even within families, even within same disease types. And that has made it really difficult for us and the pharmaceutical community to find therapeutics and treatments. It's been a challenge. Still, there's a disturbing lack of awareness about this disease within the healthcare provider community. That's just really unacceptable. And, you know, if they're not aware of it, how are your friends going to be aware of it? Like, no wonder you're afraid to tell your friends what you have, because if you say CMT disease, you're just going to get a blank stare. Say Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, and they're looking in your mouth for, like, you know, a rotten tooth. Look, there's the big 800-pound gorilla in the room. To date, there have been no drugs or therapeutics to treat this disease. And that has left the patient population oftentimes without hope and despair, especially when your healthcare providers say, okay, we got your diagnosis, but there's nothing you can do. Wow, what am I supposed to do with that information? Smoke some weed, evidently, which is probably not a bad thing. But hopefully, that is going to change very soon. The overall patient experience, to say the least, is not great. I mean, we could have all kinds of adjectives to describe what you CMT patients have to go through every day. And to say that it's horrible and debilitating and defeating is, you know, just, that's the bottom of it. And you suffer through physical and emotional indignities every day, something that normal people like me just have no experience with. Tying your shoes. You know, in the true replies, you heard people like, household chores. Hey, I would give up washing dishes in a minute, right? But what if somebody told me you can't do it because physically you're not able to? You miss those little things, and those things, little things, pile up every day, and they create this really not great feeling. It's hard to be upbeat and positive when just taking a walk outside is fraught with peril, right? This all has a cumulative effect of destroying patients' quality of life. This is not the only impact on them, but it impacts every interpersonal, it's not only impacting them, but every interpersonal relationship that they have, whether it's with a spouse, their parents, their children, their friends. I mean, this disease is just, it's all-encompassing. If you have it, everybody around you has it, and it's really, it's not easy to deal with. So today was the day. It's about the voice of the patient. And man, did we ever hear your voices. And it was really, really quite remarkable. And we heard remarkable testimony from both young patients and adults. And I'll tell you, I was cavanoying in the back there a lot because it was really quite touching. So, you know, some of the common themes that we've heard, walking and balance is really the #1 symptom that affects patients. Just think about that for a moment, what that means in the context of me, a neural normal. Walking is something I certainly take for granted. I can go anywhere at any time, upstairs, downstairs, running. And think about the progression that you had as a child where you learned to crawl and you learned to walk, and as soon as you had that walk, you started to get some independence. You got to do things. Then you were able to ride a bicycle, so now you're cruising down the block and playing with your friends. Then you got your car, and you're motoring around and being able to go wherever you want. Well, you know, when you, that idea of movement is really what this country is all about. It's been westward expansion, westward ho, and have the freedom to do what you want. What happens when that freedom is taken away from you? It's a huge loss for this patient population. Then you get into more severe symptoms like vision loss, breathing issues, hearing loss. You know, these symptoms affect those patients with devastating effect, life-altering effect. potentially fatal outcomes, especially when it comes to breathing. That's a scary situation. Everybody that said that they have a breathing issue here today, man, they're just in a total another level of experience with this disease. And then besides the physical manifestations of the disease, CMT can take a severe toll on patients' behavioral and emotional health, right? And that's really important, really important. And I know that Florian is dealing with this in Hackensack and how to help patients' behavioral health as we're trying to help them with treatments and therapeutics. You know, in today's poll, I counted that 35% of patients indicated losing, taking pleasure in doing things, or that were depressed or hopeless or worse, that they lost the will to live. Unacceptable, unacceptable. And we have to address these mental issues as we address the physical issues through therapeutics. So what can we do about it? Because that's what this is all about. And this is what you are all about as patient advocates. So we live in the age of movements now, literal movements like Me Too and Time's Up, Black Lives Matter, that have toppled governments, and they've disrupted institutions, and they've changed society through grassroots social activism. So for years, H&F and the other patient organizations like the CMTA and the MDA have been building up momentum and awareness for CMT through CMT Awareness Month and other innovative marketing initiatives. Well, today, I'm declaring that we officially have a movement, and it's going to be our movement. And I hope you will join me in supporting this movement. And although Estella is usually the person that comes up with our really snappy hashtags for all our initiatives, Estella, I'm stepping on your turf today. And I'm taking the liberty of creating a movement, a hashtag for our movement. Hashtag CMT, it's not okay. I'm going to make some statements that are not okay for me as a patient caregiver and a patient advocate about this disease. And you can let me know by clapping or getting loud or maybe an amen, how you feel about these issues. So CMT, it's not okay that the new doctors that we go to don't know what CMT is. Sorry, it's just not okay. CMT, it's not okay that it can take up to 5 years or more to get a definitive diagnosis. That's just a horrible, horrible patient experience. CMT, it's not okay once you get that diagnosis that they send you home and say there's nothing that you can do. This one's really not okay with me. CMT is not okay that insurance does not cover the devices and treatments that we need to deal with this disease. CMT, it's not okay that the rare forms of CMT disease may not get the attention or research funding needed to find the same cures that we're developing for CMT 1A and other types of the disease. CMT, it's not okay that the burden of genetic diagnosis up to this point pretty much has fallen on the patient, especially after what we've heard today from Dr. Zuckner, how important genetic diagnosis is going to be in the future therapeutics of this disease. So I'm going to challenge the people in this room, whether it's government, industry, researchers, we have to find a way. Insurance companies, unfortunately there's no payers here, otherwise I'd really give it to them, but we have to find a way to eliminate the cost of genetic diagnosis for patients. So everybody that has this disease can have a defined genetic diagnosis that can then go into research and find treatments and potential cures for all the different forms of CMT. And last but not least, it's certainly not okay that up until this point there's been no treatments or cures for this disease. But That's about to change, isn't it? And that's why we're here. With the important clinical trials that Farnex and Acceleron and others are doing for this disease, for the first time, we have hope that the first treatments for CMT are on the horizon. And we're all really excited about that. There's finally a light at the end of the tunnel. So what can we as CMT advocates do in the meantime? Well, there's just one answer. We have to get involved. You're involved by being here. You're involved by watching at home. You're involved by participating in our polls. But it can't stop there. 100% involvement is what it's going to take to cure this disease. So when we send out an email, when Allison asks you to join the registry or participate in True Reply, these things cost no money. They just take a little time. Contribute your time. Participate in clinical trials when you can. These pharmaceutical companies cannot find a cure or treatment for your disease without your patient involvement. So please, get involved and help us help you to find a cure for this disease. So one of the most exciting outcomes of this groundbreaking meeting will be the Voice of the Patient report that will be published as a collaborative effort between HNF, the CMTA, and the MDA. We should all applaud their effort to work together on this important report on behalf of our CMT community. So finally, I'd like to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today and just say, God bless you. Thank you.